I think people understand that Spotify is the biggest music streaming service around, but maybe don't quite understand how big it is. About 1 in 3 people who stream music use Spotify. That is massive. There's a new book that gets into how Spotify reshaped the economics of being an artist. The group chat's here. They have a lot of thoughts. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. I mean, look, it is easy, I think, to see Spotify be this dominant player in streaming and forget that this wasn't always the case. Like, you forget that it was once a company that had to make the case for itself while we were just beginning to get a handle on streaming, what streaming even is. But back in the early 2010s, Spotify was just like this little startup, and they were running ads that sounded like this.
In a world where everyone loves music,
first came vinyl.
the cassette tape,
The compact disc.
the MP3 player.
Which brings us to the present day.
Introducing Spotify.
A world of music.
Listen, I don't need to tell you how that turned out because they're the biggest music streaming platform in the world right now. And with all that power comes a lot of debate. You have artists and you have journalists and you have music critics and activists who debate the effect that Spotify has had on the economy that it helped create. Liz Pelly is one of those journalists. She's just released a new book. It is called Moon Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of the Perfect Playlist. Ian Kamau is a musician and culture critic. Liz Kamau, welcome to the show, y'all.
Hey.
Good morning.
I'm happy that you're here. Listen, Liz, I'm going to start with you and with the book. You begin your book by describing Spotify's sort of game-changing turn from this Swedish startup that is like trying to break into the market to becoming this dominant, music platform that we all use or so many people use. But what do you think separated Spotify from its other competitors?
The music business was still looking for solutions to piracy and file sharing at that moment. The product that Spotify was putting forth, the original business model was free music plus ads, so free music supported by ads. And that's something that the music industry at that time would have been really opposed to basically anywhere other than in Sweden. Anything that had the word free attached to it, the music business was like hard no. But piracy was so rampant in Sweden and also just had a political dimension to it in Sweden. There was a pirate party in Sweden. It was a different conversation that made the music business more willing to try something like Spotify, to license something like Spotify in Sweden in particular. And they also had a lot of well-connected music industry consultants working for them as well.
Mm-hmm. I think the idea of rooting this in Sweden is like, this doesn't start in other countries for very good reasons. Like Sweden is sort of like an interesting kind of hotbed for it to begin there. But also, how would you say Spotify and the music streaming economy kind of writ large have changed the relationship that people maybe have with music and also with the musicians who make it? How would you say they've kind of intervened in that relationship?
Mm-hmm. In the early days, streaming services were sort of more like these search bars. You would just go and have to know what you were looking for. But as they grew and had to expand their user bases, a company like Spotify became a much more curated service, more not in the business of just providing every song in the world, but, supposedly, as they put it, providing the perfect soundtrack at the perfect moment or knowing your music taste better than you know it yourself. So these days, services try to, in some ways, shape user behavior around their own discovery products like playlists and algorithmic recommendation tools, because those are the things that they see as boosting user engagement. And corporate intermediaries in the music business and culture have long tried to shape listening behavior in various ways, but I think something that is unique today is this outsized influence of data on listening, on artists, and in some ways, how all of that data kind of works to normalize, surveillance in our everyday lives.
Yeah, so what Spotify has really done is sort of introduce a whole new set of intermediaries in terms of like how you interact with the music that you want to listen to. I'm really sensitive to that idea, Kamau, because I think like the promise of a streaming service would have been that, to take, the Napster idea of like, hey, you pirated this song, you pirated this music that you already care about, and it just made it a little bit easier for you to access. You're an indie musician who's had to sort of contend with how to get your music out there, even since those days of Napster. When you first sort of like see this buzz around Spotify, What is the promise to you as an indie musician at the time? Like, what's the thing that you become attracted to that maybe wasn't available when this service launches?
I think it was the ability to get your music basically out to the entire world, and to have people be able to access it in a simple way, as possible. So there was a certain point in time where it's like I was pressing records, or actually physical cassettes and CDs, and not only does that cost money for like the actual materiality of that, but also you have to move it across the world. So if I wanted to ship, I toured South Africa. If I wanted to ship 100, 150, 200, 500 CDs to South Africa from Toronto, Canada, it would have been incredibly expensive, so expensive that it wouldn't even make sense for me to do it. And so Spotify and the other streaming services enabled people to be able to hear my music without me spending any money on that transportation, so that people could hear it anywhere in the world.
So that's a big promise. That's a big promise because the idea is it opens up the world for you. But the big question that people ask about Spotify is what is the thing that you get out of it? And one of the major criticisms that Spotify sort of had to contend with has centered on how little they pay the artists whose music actually appears on their platforms. They don't pay per stream. It's kind of this complicated sort of calculation that works out to about an average of 0.003 to 0.005 cents per stream. They also do not pay artists with fewer than 1,000 streams. Your book sort of argues that Spotify gets away with it because how they pay artists is still kind of like shrouded in mystery. They don't entirely disclose how that works. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the ways that they have kind of like gate kept or continue to gatekeep, the information about how artists actually get paid?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way in which musicians get paid from streaming, artists, there's this figure that circulates. Artists will often say that they get paid an average of 0.0035 cents per stream. And this figure, I think, sort of frustrates a lot of people in the music business because there really is no per stream valuation of music. Artists are paid through these incredibly complicated revenue share systems. And one proposal that artists and musicians advocates have put forth for a while now that I think would really help simplify this is this idea of what's called user-centric streaming. So rather than this really complicated revenue share model, user-centric is this model where I pay $10 a month for a streaming service. They take their 30% cut, as they have since the beginning, and that $7 extra that's left in the pot goes to the artists that I actually stream.
The idea of, okay, so I listen to a lot of, why don't we talk about, I don't know, like Waxahachie, for example. I've been listening to a lot of Waxahachie's record from last year as I sort of like start this year. If I think about like how much time and energy I sort of spend streaming that record, you're saying like from the money that I would pay, Spotify would sort of say, okay, a larger pot of the money that you pay to us should go to this artist. Is that the explanation of how that should work?
Yeah. So for example, like if I spent half of my time listening to, Waxahachie's music and half of my time listening to, Ian's music, then my $7 split up amongst those two artists.
Ian, I would like to give you that money. I think you should be.
You.
I think you should be entitled to it. But okay. So talk to me. What do you make of what Liz is saying there? This idea of this sort of user-centric approach to how streaming should be divvied up.
I think that's probably the best approach for the audience. I don't imagine that Spotify is interested in doing that because part of the way that they break down, they're a business, and part of the way they break down is like, are you a paid subscriber? Are you not a paid subscriber? Are you have you looked at a bunch of ads? Have you bought anything from those ads? Like that, the way that they mathematically break down, it makes more sense for them in terms of just being, a capitalistic entity to be able to like prioritize a bunch of other things that really have nothing to do with the audience that wants to listen to that music. So on my side as an artist, and what I would like to both get and also give to like an audience of people, that makes total sense. I don't imagine that Spotify is going to do that.
No, and I think it's not lost on me that all of this conversation is landing during this other moment where, there was this recent legal petition by Drake because last year he sort of alleged that Spotify and Universal Music Group worked together to unfairly boost the streams of Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. Drake withdrew that case, but like some critics kind of really felt like they were looking forward to how that case played that plays out in the courts. And the reason for that being that he could have helped maybe pull back the curtains on exactly how Spotify thinks about how to allocate streams and what to pay for those streams. I'm curious what you think about that, but like this idea that this court case, Kamau, could have actually like opened up the doors to see how Spotify actually does business. Were you one of those people who are like waiting in anticipation to see it, get to the courts?
Yeah, I think the Drake petition had the possibility of having artists and people more generally understand how Spotify works in a clearer way. And, I think the Drake Kendrick, petition conversation got moved to everything around the beef and not necessarily around the legalities and what could have been revealed if a court and lawyers were actually looking at how those things operate in real life.
Liz, what about you? How are you thinking about that potential, Drake petition that eventually got withdrawn? Were you also one of those people who were like, okay, this is it. This is a moment where we get actually like a chance to peek at how Spotify, divides up its business?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of different ways in which commercial partnerships and secret commercial dealings currently shape what you see when you open a streaming app, and also the experiences of musicians on streaming apps, and anything that would potentially contribute to more transparency around that, I think would be positive. So it's interesting to think about how this could have affected that.
Yeah. I think it's like this interestingly like sort of lost opportunity, because you're right, Kamau. Like we sort of got entirely pushed onto, oh, Drake is suing because of the beef, and as you heard more and more critics, take a look at the actual lawsuit, they're like, this is not really about the beef. This is actually about the relationship between labels and Spotify, and could sort of bring a lot of stuff to the light. Come, I want to talk about the consumer's place in all of this, because I think that's important. How much of the struggles that musicians, face in the streaming economy actually comes down to Spotify versus, the choices that me as a consumer or someone who's listening to this conversation as a consumer, how much of it is on the consumers, do you think?
I mean, I think the consumer, the audience for any artist is in a system where they are given choices. And I don't think the choice between, let's say, the expense of vinyl en masse and streaming services, which have basically every song in the world available to you on your cell phone, is really an honest choice. Some people will choose to buy vinyl and CDs still if they are produced, but the reality is it's not really a choice. The model has shifted and the paradigm has shifted along with the model. And now we were accustomed, we use cars, we don't ride horses en masse anymore. It's just the technology has moved forward and the audience has followed it. It's not really an honest choice to say that the audience is responsible somehow for that paradigm shift.
Liz, is that where you're at with this? Like the idea of like, okay, there was a moment when audiences sort of had a choice in terms of how to consume their music. And we are kind of now looking at an evolution in technology where there's no way to sort of break out of this format. So how do we make it more fair? Or is it not really on the consumer? And is it more on Spotify, you think?
Yeah, I would never say that there's no alternatives to these systems, but I also think that elsewhere in the world, individual solutions to collective problems often feel really unsatisfying and also fall short. So that's why, in my book, I argue both for a series of reforms that could potentially make streaming more fair to listeners and artists. I talk about the importance of general data protection laws, talk about different ways in which the streaming model might be reimagined to make streaming more fair. Then I also talk about things that artists are doing in their own communities to sort of create alternatives completely outside of the corporate music industry. And I think that both are important.
And if I can just like push you a little bit on that, just to talk about the consumer piece a little bit more, as people are listening to this and they're thinking about the consumption habits that they have when it comes to the music that they listen to, what's one thing that they should maybe rethink or consider again? Because you've done all this research for the book, I see behind you that you've got this entire wall of notes. That looks great. What's a place where a consumer can maybe insert a bit more agency if they want to be able to better support their artists, but not through this sort of streaming infrastructure?
I think one thing that, I think people should keep in mind is that music is labor. It requires a lot of work. I think that the way in which music has been devalued by the streaming economy and music business in general, not just streaming, the entire music business today works in some ways to really invisibilize a lot of the labor that goes into creating music. And there are things that we can do to revalue music, whether it be directly buying music from artists if you can afford to do so through platforms like Bandcamp, or directly from artists at their shows, going to shows, sharing music you're excited about, participating in alternative networks of sharing and championing the music that is important to you.
Mm-hmm. I think that is a wonderful place to leave it. I really appreciate both of your time. Ian Kamau and Liz Pelly, thank you for your time again.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Ian Kamau is an artist and culture critic based in Toronto, and Liz Pelly is a music journalist and writer based in Brooklyn, New York. Liz's new book is called Moon Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of the Perfect Playlist. That book is out now. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. All right, I want to shift gears, and we're going to go to the world of tennis. Take a listen to this.
Oh, come on.
Maybe the best shot of the night.
I mean, that is absolutely impossible.
Look at the right smile there. Off balance, moving backwards, hits the toughest shot in the book.
And a shot that takes him to within 1 point of the handshake moment.
The number one ranked Jannik Sinner scoring a match point of the Australian Open last night. The tournament wraps up this weekend, but the audio you just heard comes from the Australian Open's YouTube channel. But when you can actually hear that the match is happening as it's being played, what you see on the screen on their YouTube channel is essentially a video game version of the match being played in real time. So instead of like real players, basically you get these like animated avatars, and they're mimicking every move that they see on the court. What is going on there? Morgan Campbell has thoughts about it. He's here to explain all of it. Morgan, what's good, homie? How's it going?
Man, it's always good. Always great to see you in person or online.
Come on now. It's a delight to see you. Okay, tell me why the Australian Open's YouTube channel is currently streaming these matches that look like a Nintendo Wii game. What's going on?
First level, from the perspective of a 48-year-old person that grew up with real sports, I don't know why.
Okay, got it.
Second, what I'm hearing is that it might be some sort of clever workaround to broadcast licensing agreements, so that right now, the Australian Open, if you are in the US, you watch it on ESPN, they have exclusive rights. In Canada, it's on TSN, they have exclusive rights. And you, in the real world, shouldn't be able to watch it live on YouTube, but here's the Australian Open's own YouTube channel showing a Nintendo Wii-looking version of the live action. But the question that it immediately triggers for me is, why would you do this? Like, why, if you are the Australian Open and you have broadcast partners who pay big money to broadcast this thing live, on the understanding that they are the only people that can broadcast this thing live in certain countries, by country, why would you undermine them like that? Because now, if I'm ESPN or if I'm TSN, the first thing I want to do is say, hey, Australian Open, why are you doing this? Why can people watch this in Canada? They're supposed to come to me to watch this in Canada. Either we redo this agreement so I pay less, or we redo this agreement where in a way that you spell out that you are not going to do this thing to undermine us. So that's my top 2 level reactions to it.
Okay, I love the top 2 level reactions. I think there's a lot to get into there, but also I just want to explain to people, because I watched a little bit of it, and it's pretty incredible. Like, I read that like they use like multiple cameras and dozens of tracking points on like a skeleton to recreate the actual player's movements and mannerisms. So it's pretty advanced as far as like video game avatars go. Now, I want to watch Jannik Sinner do the thing, and I want to watch an animated avatar of him doing the thing. Having said that, the idea of, if you're the Australian Open and you've locked yourself into millions of dollars of broadcast contracts with ESPN in the US, and you're like, but not everybody has ESPN and not everybody is going to watch, on television. Maybe the workaround is to say, well, how do we find the people on YouTube and give them something that is adjacent to the thing, but not quite the thing? Like, what do you make of that workaround? Is that sufficient? What do you think?
Well, it's a couple of things I make of it. One, Tennis Australia's head of innovation, gave this quote to the Guardian.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to quote it, I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically he's explaining that like real life sports footage and like the video game versions of it, they are starting to merge, and this is the direction they want to push. And again, the question to me is why? Like, I understand why if I play an NBA video game, they are really meticulous about making the action look like real life.
Yes, they are.
Because right down to like LeBron James's black beard dye. But it's because I am playing these games while the NBA is not on. I need a replacement for the real life action, but the real life is the real life. What I don't understand is why you want to make real life look like video games, because they have dozens of cameras to make a video game look like it's moving like a real person. And the other way to do that is just to record the real person.
Okay, I want to put a couple thoughts to you. First, like, yes, the Australian Open, this is a gimmick that is just sort of like a way to get around these broadcast rights. But like other leagues and networks have sort of experimented a little bit with this as well. Take a listen to this.
Burrow, Chase, and Higgins are out. Bart, Lisa, and Ralph are in. Bart Simpson takes the snap, throws to Ralph. Touchdown! He's not in danger. He's in the end zone.
Nice! He choose to throw it to Ralph. I'm so happy for the little guy. Did you see his release at the line of scrimmage?
I really got to tell people listening on the radio that Morgan's expressions, as I sort of play him that clip, are just beautifully full of pain as like a seasoned sport reporter. That was a broadcast of an actual NFL game last year between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Dallas Cowboys, but with animated Simpsons characters on the field. This is just another example of sort of major league sports and maybe partnering with like Disney for these like sort of crossover experiences. We're seeing more and more of this, Morgan, and I think like it's not lost on me that like so far people seem to be loving some of these broadcasts and some of these gimmicks. Like the Australian Open thing last year debuted about 140,000 viewers over the first 4 days of the event. This year, the Australian Open's live streams of these animated things has drawn like 1 million viewers over the same period. This is becoming a little bit more popular. Why do you think we're seeing so much of this?
Part of it is that just from the perspective of the audience is that you have a bunch of kids now who have grown up with video games. You have a bunch of adults, who have grown up with video games.
Yeah.
Whereas like my parents did not grow up with video games, and video games were just this weird thing to them that they never really let me get into.
Yeah.
And for that, I'm kind of thankful. But now you have a lot of people who've grown up with video games. So like a video game stylized version of real action is completely normal to them. Now, in terms of the NFL, we'll focus on The Simpsons for now. Okay. One, I see why they do it, because if you are Disney Plus and you have all this Simpsons content, you have this Simpsons library that you want to monetize and you want to get the word out about your Simpsons library, live sports is the best way to advertise, because live sports is the last thing that a lot of people watch on television together at the same time. And then among live sports, NFL is where it's at. Like NFL is crowding out every other pro sport in the US. Like they told the NBA, Christmas isn't your holiday anymore. Mm-hmm. It's ours. And there's nothing the NBA can do about it. But so there's that. But I guess the disconnect I see is that it's also sort of by cartoonizing pro sports, it's sort of it's a transparent attempt to try to sell this to younger kids. But the audience for The Simpsons has never been kids. And the audience for The Simpsons, like the peak years of The Simpsons, like the Conan O'Brien years of The Simpsons, that was 32, 33 years ago. This is sort of like the second Space Jam with LeBron James, and they have Bugs Bunny and all these other Looney Tunes characters. My daughter watches that. She doesn't know who these, when I was 5 years old, I knew Bugs Bunny was Bugs Bunny. My 5-year-old daughter looks at this and says, there's LeBron James and Rich and Rabbit. Like, they don't know who these people are. And so I don't quite know if they are really reaching the demographic they think they're reaching by tying this thing to The Simpsons. And if you are making football players and you have an analogous Simpsons character, I have to wonder which NFL owner is going to be Mr. Burns. I'm thinking it's Jerry Jones.
I hadn't considered the implications of being like, sometimes actually there might be some villains in this. Morgan, I got to leave it there, man. I appreciate your message to be like, watch real sports. Morgan Campbell, you're the best. I appreciate your time.
I know I'm the best. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
acknowledging it.
Of course. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then.